The following is a special presentation of the Red Stick Business Report. Watch future episodes on Soul of the South or contact your local cable provider.
Hi, welcome to this week's episode of the Red Stick Business Report Show. I'm Howard White, your host. The Red Stick Business Report Show is designed to give you a dynamic and insightful look at some of Baton Rouge's most exciting and dynamic leaders. Today, we have on set with us Mr. Nathaniel Causey. Nathaniel, or we're going to call him Nate. So, Nate, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, Howard.
Great. Nate is a district manager with HR Block, but he's also a father, very active in the communities, relatively new to Baton Rouge the second time around, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But, you know, when I looked into his background up in Newark, New Jersey, I mean, he was always involved in the community, and that was something that just really piqued my interest, man.
Okay, yes.
You know, so let's talk about those early years. You know, I'm looking back at that bio, I said, hold up, this guy grew up as a military brat. Had to.
Absolutely, man. I had the unique pleasure of growing up. My father was in the Air Force, and my stepfather was also in the Air Force. So grew up in New Jersey. Dad was from Camden, New Jersey. Major city back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Right.
You had RCA there. You had Campbell Soup, which was the headquarters. And then we moved out to Illinois, which was my mother's hometown, Champaign.
Okay.
You have the University of Illinois, but there was a unique little Air Force base out there called Chanute Air Force Base, and that's where I was born. So growing up between Camden, New Jersey, and Champaign, Illinois, is where I spent most of my years.
You know, and that's a lot of people don't think about those little small bases all around the country.
Absolutely.
Talk about that. But no, you had some chance to spend some time internationally. Talk about that experience as a youngster actually being.
Oh, wow. That was an amazing time. My stepfather got stationed at Barksdale Air Force Base in, I guess it was around 1976, 77. Okay. And so I got a chance to get a little bit of Louisiana flavor, North Louisiana at the time.
And there is a difference now, so you know that. Right. You know that, even today.
I love my North Louisiana. I ended up going to Bossier High School for actually 2 years. Okay. And then my dad got orders to Kaiserslautern, Germany. And we were stationed over there and went to high school there in K-Town, as we affectionately know it, for 2 years. And then my senior year, well, end of my junior year, got orders and we came back to Illinois. So in 7 years, I went to 3 different junior high schools and 4 different high schools in 7 years. Wow. And so that experience itself, I think what it did for me, Howard, was it made me be able to adapt, overcome, and improvise any situation.
You know, I think that's critical because a lot of times our students, and it leads to issues such as bullying and other things, they don't know how to adapt.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes that, you know, translates into negative activity.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that experience, unique, but I wouldn't change it for the world. You know, a chance to meet different cultures. While we were in Germany, I traveled to almost all of Europe, England, right. Belgium, France, Spain, and it was an experience at 15 years old that I wouldn't change it for the world. Meeting different cultures, understanding that people all around the world, same place, just like you, are going through the same thing. And it gave you a respect for what I call, I think people have permanent interests, not necessarily permanent ties. And in this world, with all the stuff that we see happening at the congressional level with the shutdown of the government, you know, we really should have permanent, you know, interest in what is right for people, not necessarily permanent ties to parties. And that's my political statement for today.
Permanent interest and permanent ties. I'm literally have to write that down.
That's right. Permanent interest is what we have, not permanent ties.
Gotcha. Talk a little bit about that decision to leave Illinois and come down to Southern University.
Wow. Now, that's one of those decisions that I laugh about to this day because I thought I was a ball player back then, and coming out of high school, going to 4 different high schools, I had some scholarships.
Which sport?
Basketball, but I played football and I ran track. And I'd hurt my knee over the summer, so I got kind of redshirt. I had a couple scholarships to schools in Iowa. And my friend Vincent Jackson, who's a Southern grad, I think Vince graduated in 1983 maybe, and he came home to Champaign and had a yearbook. And in that yearbook, he opened it up, and I saw all the pretty girls from Southern University, and I applied to Southern University in August and got a scholarship, and I came down to Southern because of that yearbook, and that's how I ended up here. I didn't know what I wanted to major in. I just knew I was going to be where all the pretty girls were.
You know, as they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Right.
Or shall I say, some pictures are worth thousands of words.
Oh, it was back then, I tell you, man.
Now, when you talk about Southern, you know, share that experience, because I think sometimes we miss out because we're fearful of leaving what we know.
Absolutely.
You know, so you left what you knew, the comfort of your parents and comfort of Illinois, to come down to Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Absolutely. I think my experience growing up in the military helped me a lot, because when I came to Southern, there were two people that I knew, two of my high school friends from Illinois, Mike Jones and Greg Ash. They were the only, and no, Iran Charity, was three of us that came down here, and we didn't know anybody. And it seemed like when we got to Southern, everybody knew everybody but us. You know, we're going to the cafeteria, people are saying hello, and we're like, man, we don't know anyone here. So
Right.
that experience at Southern, getting to there, and I distinctly remember going to breakfast at Southern, and what we thought was cream of wheat, because in the Midwest, it was grits, and I never had grits in my life, and so we would put sugar and butter on our grits, and people could tell that we were not from the South, because when we went to breakfast, all the students from the North put sugar and butter on their grits, and we thought it was cream of wheat. But Southern was very different back then. I can remember going through registration, and it was an old joke that if you could get through registration at Southern University, you could do anything and conquer the world.
Right.
Well, we had those old kits, you know, and
Right.
and you would start off on the back of the campus, and you got over to the mini dome, and all of a sudden someone told you, well, baby, you forgot something. You got to go all the way back over to the other side of campus, and all of this in August in 90-degree weather, walking back. I don't know how we survived it, but it made us very, very strong in believing that if you could get through this, you could survive anything. So Southern was a blessing in disguise, to say the least, coming here, meeting friends from all over the world. You know, we had a strong international program back then, so I naturally aligned to that, but it was a great experience, Howard.
You know, as you just taking me back to my days in Southern, just kind of just the opposite. I'm a country boy
Right.
coming to the big city. I'm just the opposite. I hadn't seen much of the world, but it was an exciting time. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that and some of those other experiences that you've had. So I would ask that you stay tuned for the next segment of the Red Stick Business Report show as we come back with Nate Causey and just talk more about Southern University and some of his unique experiences from around the world. Hi, welcome back to the Red Stick Business Report show. I'm your host, Howard White, and today I'm on set with Nathaniel Causey Jr., or Nate as we're going to call him the rest of the way. You know, we were talking about those Southern University years, and Nate and I actually met over the phone before and did favors for each other before we ever met each other. And one of them was because of Southern University, and as we like to debate about Beta Sigma. I'm an Alpha, he's an Omega, and we talk about who's the real Beta Sigma, because you know, we've got a unique distinction on that campus. Both chapters have the same name.
That's right.
And we used to have fun with that. I told him during my years we would have the battle of the real Beta Sig, but nobody lost, because at the end of the day we all were tired and just worn out and had a great time.
Absolutely.
But talk about that experience of brotherhood and kindred spirit that you learned at Southern University that you had not experienced before that.
Right. Well, I think, as Howard mentioned, being an Omega, I pledged in the 1983 at Southern University. And prior to that, as many times you see in historically black college universities, sometimes the chapters are on suspension, or, you know, we go through those phases of what we do. And we were on suspension in 1981. So my line, 1983, was sort of like the catalyst of the chapter. So we really, really learned about brotherhood. You know, our motto, friendship is central to the soul. Friendship is what we're really about. Now, that friendship is not just from a fraternal standpoint of the brothers that pledge with you, the brothers that are in the chapter, but many of the guys that I was in school with as freshmen, they went their different ways. I have some buddies that are alphas, that are kappas, that are sigmas, but we had a bond, and to this day, we still get together now that I've returned to Baton Rouge, and we meet twice a month just to get together, because before we were in individual fraternities, We were brothers from Jones Hall, that 6th floor as freshmen, and that bond. So you learn to depend on each other. You learn to have friendships that have expanded over 33 years with some of my friends. And Southern provided that atmosphere for me.
I think that's a critical part, as I'm currently working on a book about Southern University called Southern Greats. And that's one of the things that just common, that fraternity among students. It's not just inside fraternity and sororities. But as you got ready, now it's time to leave Southern University. Talk about that giant step. I call it the giant step.
The giant step. What are you going to do, right?
Yeah, what's next? You've grown.
I'm grown. So I graduated with a degree in philosophy, and I had a minor in accounting. And my real goal of what I wanted to do was to be a pilot. That was my dream. To this day, for those of you that are going to be out there, if you see me on a 747 and you hear my voice, that's my ultimate bucket list. But when I came out of high school, I got accepted to the Air Force Academy, but because I wore glasses, I couldn't be a pilot. So, I figured, what am I going to do? I could always had the gift of gab. And so out of the blue, I said, well, maybe I'll be a lawyer. And applied to some law schools, and I got accepted to Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. Received a full academic scholarship to Drake, and went up there not knowing a soul, and which was very different. Iowa, 80 degrees below zero, cold. I think the African-American population in Iowa was less than 2% in the entire state. But once again, my experience of being a military brat, I was able to adapt, overcome, and adjust to that environment in Iowa. And met some very, very good friends while I was in Iowa. A couple of friends that had gone to Jackson State were in law school with me. Had a brother out of North Carolina A&T. So most of the graduate students were from HBCUs, and that kind of helped us get through that challenge sometimes when you go to a majority school of being from a historically black college and institution, and how to adjust to that different environment.
I think that's critical. A couple points you made there is that being able to adjust, and like you said, going back to that August at Southern, having to adjust of, okay, how do I get through registration?
That's right.
And so now you're able to take those experiences, those tests that you've had, and use them for other things. Just tell us a little bit about your life after you left Drake. Here you are, an attorney, you're an accountant, man, ready to conquer the world. What happened?
Well, originally I was set to go into the military, because at that time I'd gotten married, and my no longer married right now, but my ex was in the military. She had gotten commissioned, and we were trying to stay together. And I'd originally set to get commissioned in the JAG Corps, and then she got stationed out in New Jersey, of all places. And I went out there and got a job with a law firm, Harvey C. Johnson and Associates, and decided I wasn't going to go into the military and wanted to go into private practice. So I worked with a law firm. He was a judge also, but the unique perspective that I've got, and I've got to give Mr. Johnson probably credit to my trek into business. So I'm there. He was a businessman. He owned Burger Kings. He owned nonprofits, and the law firm was really was there to service his businesses. Exactly. So being there, he had me working on school board stuff. I was doing personal injury, and after a couple years, I really realized I wanted to be in business. And after a couple years, I decided to go out on my own. Left the firm. Became a stockbroker of all things. I wanted to learn about money. So I started working with a company called Baird Investments, which was the investment arm of Northwestern Mutual Life. And I learned about investments, insurance, how to sell myself, which I was always good at, but it really, that experience with Northwestern Mutual solidified my trek into business. And that was 20-something years ago, 4 or 5 different businesses, and,
Well, I want to talk about one, and then now it makes a lot more sense. Stockbroker, then blackcyberspace.com.
Oh, wow, Black Cyberspace, man, I'll tell you. So for many people that don't know, I was the co-founder of blackcyberspace.com, which was the first African-American owned ISP, Internet Service Provider, in the country. Now, if you don't know much about ISPs, back when AOL was the predominant force in the internet, we had dial-up, there was no broadband, there was no cable, there was no DSL, and we had this bold idea that we were going to compete side by side against AOL for the African-American market. So my partner, Anthony McCullum, he was the computer geek. I didn't know anything about the internet. In actuality, the way I got it was that I looked at the internet as a toll booth, and we were trying to get into the city of Philadelphia, and all the ISPs were the people collecting the tolls. And the city of Philadelphia was the internet. And that's how I understood, and that's how he got me on board. From that point, I went out, beat the drum, went all over the country. With my background legally, I did some private placement memorandums. We raised about $750,000 in startup capital. And then a gentleman by the name of James C. Smith, who was a B100 CEO, invested that money in our company, and that gave us our start. We competed for a couple of months, and then we ended up selling the business.
Wow, man, that had to be some dynamic times, those dot-coms.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. When we come back, we're going to dive in a little bit about you down in Brazil. I mean, a lot of people would
man,
love
you're going
to know,
deep.
Yeah, we're going to go deep. We're going to go deep, way down south. I mean, we already south, but we're going to go way down south, down in Brazil.
Okay.
So I challenge you to stay tuned to the next segment of the Red Stick Business Report Show.
Yeah.
Hi, welcome back to the Red Stick Business Report Show. I'm Howard White, your host, and today I'm on set with Nate Causey, the manager, general manager of HR Block here. And with that's over, how many stores you over?
I have 19 stores. I'm actually the district manager. 19 stores and about 220 employees. And we cover all of Baton Rouge. I go out to Port Allen, north to Baker, Zachary, all of Central, and then I go all the way over to Hammond and Ponchatoula.
Yeah, it's a lot of area, and that's why I had to ask, because they're always adding stores and locations almost every season. But we're not going to talk about that right now. We're going to go back, like I said, down south.
Deep south, right?
Deep south, down to Brazil.
Down to Brazil,
you know, home of the future Olympics coming up.
That's right, shortly. World Cup and the Olympics. So
now, talk about how a young man from Illinois wound up in Brazil. Not just visiting, but really working and living there for several years.
That is correct. So how I ended up in Brazil, I'll dovetail back into black cyberspace. So at that time of the dot-com, we kind of got out of that just in the nick of time before that first bottom dropped out, and sold our interest in the company. And I always had Brazil on my bucket list. I always wanted to go see Christ Redeemer, which is the statue in Rio de Janeiro. Cristo de Redentor is how you say it in Portuguese. And it was on my bucket list. And so, at that time, sold some stock and had a little bit of money. And I said, I'm going to Rio. And I went down to Rio. And first visit was for a week. And progressively over the next 2 years, my visits to Brazil were from a weekend to a week to 2 weeks to a month, and eventually I said, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and move here. So I sold some of my real estate in New Jersey at the time, and I moved to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And ironically, while I'm down there, I run into one of my buddies from law school who I didn't even know was there, and actually was, his name is Daryl Golar, but he was the guy that trained most of the original UFC guys that are now fighting. He was that All-American wrestler out of the University of Minnesota.
Wow.
In law school with me, down in Brazil, training guys before the UFC became what it was.
Right.
And so I met Daryl down there, and I fell in love with the country, the culture, and within a matter of a year or so, I was a resident, and I lived in Brazil from 1999 to 2005.
All right, so I'm going to ask you something about Brazil, but more so, what did you do professionally? And I'll keep it professional.
Well, professionally, at that time I was buying real estate. I was still working with particular clients because my background legally was offshore investments. I did private placement memorandums. I would set up corporations in any jurisdiction, whether it was Seychelles, Mauritius, the Caribbean, and I really was helping Americans, primarily a lot of African-American men and women who were now starting to make their trek to Brazil, showing them how to navigate the legal system down there, helping them get their what we call permanent or tourist or business visa, and buying real estate and enjoying life.
Great. Yeah. I know you lived in several cities. Just talk about that, because when people say Brazil, they just think Rio.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I lived primarily in Rio for the first couple of years, and then I moved south to an area called the Costa Verde, which is the Green Coast. And I lived in a town called Muriqui Mangaratiba, which is about halfway between the border of Sao Paulo State and Rio State. It was a little fishing village. Lived about 5 minutes from the beach. I had banana trees in my backyard, orange trees, and basically every day, I worked on my computer and did my business, but spent a lot of time at the beach, a lot of time writing. I wrote a couple books while I was down there that dealt with business, incorporate and build a financial empire, and then I shared my experience with Regulation D financing, how I raised money for the internet company and was buying real estate and chilling.
Yeah, that definitely a unique experience as you look at it, and he is fluent in Portuguese, so he really enjoyed the experience there.
Sim, eu falo português. Eu sou americano, mas o coração é brasileiro. So what I said is that I speak Portuguese, even though I'm American, my heart is Brazilian.
Gotcha. So now, what brought you back to the States, and then let's talk a little bit about, here in Baton Rouge.
Currently, okay, yeah. So what brought me back to the U.S. in 2005 was my father had gotten sick. He had a stroke. And really, I came back for family reasons.
Gotcha.
And while I was back in the U.S., I was looking for an opportunity, was here about a year. And I originally went to a franchise convention in Philadelphia, PA. I returned to New Jersey, and H&R Block was there. And I really looked at the model, and I said, man, this is a great business. I can work 4 months of the year, make my money, and then head back to Brazil. And that really was, my focus, once my dad had gotten better.
Right.
And so I originally came to the company to be a franchisee, and then somewhere through that process, I got converted to the corporate.
Right.
And that was 9 years ago, and 3 other districts prior to coming to Baton Rouge. I also was the person involved. In 2011, the company went back to Brazil, and we set up an office, and I did all of the initial client service training the first H&R Block employees in Sao Paulo, and we now currently have an office of H&R Block in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Let's talk about what impact you plan to have here in Baton Rouge.
Wow, the impact that I think we've already had. I took over the district in the territory in June of this year, and initially the district was down in revenue and results, and we just had our national convention, U.S. retail meeting, and our district was honored. We were up 25.8% in revenue from June up until October. Okay. So we've already had an impact on the district financially, but the true impact came about how we do business. So I do business based upon some 4 basic fundamentals, Howard. Everything we do must be legally, ethically, and morally done. And I don't tolerate what I call stank-a-dank attitudes in my district.
Stank-a-dank attitudes.
Stank-a-dank. So from that perspective, what I plan to do in the community is, meeting people like yourself, networking, making H&R Block just not a brand name from a national perspective, but for people to see, yes, we are open year-round.
Right.
We are in the community. We've co-sponsored some events locally. The Zombie Bash, I was fortunate enough to participate in that, and we were one of the co-sponsors in that.
Well, definitely. Like I said, I opened the show by saying 30 minutes is never enough when you started meeting interesting people.
Yes, sir.
So if you ever want to talk to Nate, just stop by H&R Block or give him a call over at Cartana Place. But I challenge you to watch next week's episode of the Red Stick Business Report, as we have new and other exciting business leaders from the Baton Rouge area.